Thrown from the walls, punishment for resisting siege. No battlefield, no negotiation, just the top of your own city wall and the ground rushing up to meet you. The Assyrian Empire didn't punish resistance with defeat, it punished resistance with spectacle. When a city refused to surrender before the siege began, the survivors didn't receive mercy when the walls finally broke. They received a lesson. Captured defenders were dragged to the top of their own fortifications, the very walls they had fought to hold, and thrown off. The fall wasn't always fatal. Palace reliefs carved at Nimrud, now housed in the British Museum, show exactly what happened next. Bodies crumpled at the base, shattered legs, broken spines, figures still alive, lying in heaps while Assyrian infantry marched directly over them. But the fall was only the beginning. The bodies, living and dead alike, were impaled on sharpened stakes driven into the ground at the base of the walls, lined up, arranged deliberately, facing outward, not for the conquered city to see, for the next city on the march. The Assyrians turned a city's own architecture into its execution device. Your walls didn't protect you, they killed you. This was the gentlest death the Assyrian Empire had to offer. Everything from here gets worse. Impalement, the Assyrian signature. A fall from a wall gives gravity 2 seconds to finish the job. The Assyrians had a method that gave it days. The Assyrian term was anazakipi zakapu, literally, to impale on a stake. It was the empire's defining method of execution. The first mass-documented use occurred under King Ashurnasirpal II during the siege of Amati, modern Diyarbakir in southeastern Turkey, in 866 BC. His own royal inscription states it plainly, "I impaled on stakes live troops around his city." The mechanics were simple and deliberate. A sharpened wooden stake was driven through the lower body. The victim was then raised upright, and gravity took over. The body's own weight pulled it slowly downward, inch by inch. Death came in hours, sometimes days. But the Assyrians added refinements that made survival even more impossible. Hands and feet were frequently amputated before impalement, removing any ability to push against the stake or shift position. There was no way to slow the descent. No way to relieve the pressure, just weight, wood, and time. The rows of impaled captives weren't hidden. They were placed on hillsides outside the next target city, visible from miles away as the army approached. Visiting ambassadors from foreign courts walked past them on the road to meet the king. The dead weren't removed. They were the decor. Vlad the Impaler used this identical technique 2,000 years later and became the most feared ruler in European history for it. The Assyrians were the originals, and for them, impalement wasn't even the worst option on the table. Flaying Alive, punishment for rebellion. Impalement left the body intact. The Assyrians had a punishment that removed the body entirely, while the person inside it was still alive. Flaying is the systematic removal of skin from a living human being, and in the Assyrian Empire, it wasn't rare. It was policy. The earliest detailed account comes from Ashurnasirpal II at the city of Suru in 882 BC. After crushing a rebellion, he ordered the captured rebel chiefs flayed alive. Their skins were then draped over a pillar erected at the city gate. Some skins were spread within the pillar itself. Others hung on stakes arranged around it. At the city of Damdamusa, the rebel governor Hulai was captured alive, flayed, and his skin was spread across the city wall as a public display. But under King Ashurbanipal, who ruled from 668 to 627 BC, flaying reached an entirely different scale. Palace reliefs excavated at Nineveh depict Elamite prisoners fastened to the ground, while Assyrian soldiers systematically peeled their skin away. In the same panels, other captives are shown having their tongues torn from their mouths simultaneously. Ashurbanipal's palace reliefs alone account for 35% of all known depictions of violence from the entire Neo-Assyrian period. The removed skins weren't discarded. They were displayed inside temples, draped as religious offerings, decorating the houses of Assyrian gods. But Ashurbanipal's cruelty extended beyond the physical. He forced 2 Elamite brothers, Nabu Naid and Belatir, to publicly grind up the bones of their own dead father. Another captive, Nabu Kate Sabat, was forced to wear his brother's severed head around his neck. The first entries on this list destroyed individual bodies. From here, the Assyrian Empire started destroying everything else. Mass burning, punishment for cities that resisted. A single flaying took one life. What Ashurnasirpal II did at the city of Kinabu took 3,000. His own inscription records every detail. 600 of their warriors I put to the sword, 3,000 captives I burned with fire. I did not leave a single one among them alive to serve as a hostage. He then specified separately, their young men and maidens I burned in the fire. 3,000 people, not on a battlefield, not in combat, in a controlled, deliberate mass burning carried out inside the conquered city itself. The city became the furnace. Its own walls kept the fire contained. At the city of Tila, after a 2-day rebellion, Ashurnasirpal layered his punishments simultaneously. He arranged dead bodies into pillars. He burned the young. He flayed the governor. Multiple methods, applied at once, in full view of everyone still breathing. But the sequence mattered. Burning frequently came after mutilation. Noses were cut off first, ears removed, eyes gouged from their sockets. The victims were still alive when they were placed into the fires. The burning wasn't the punishment. It was the final stage of a process that had already destroyed the person piece by piece. The king stood nearby throughout, dictating every detail to a scribe. Not because he needed a record, because he wanted every act permanently carved into stone, mounted on palace walls, visible to every visitor, every diplomat, every future generation. 3,000 people in a single afternoon, documented by the man who ordered it, preserved in his own words. The living display, mutilation without death. Every punishment so far ended when the body stopped breathing. This one was specifically designed to make sure it didn't. Ashurnasirpal II's own inscription reads, "Of some I cut off their feet and hands. Of others I cut off the ears, noses, and lips. Of the young men's ears I made a heap. Of the old men's heads I made a minaret. I exposed their heads as a trophy in front of their city." The Assyrians didn't always kill. They amputated hands, feet, noses, ears, and lips. They gouged out eyes, and then they released the victims back into their own cities, alive. These survivors couldn't work, couldn't fight, couldn't feed themselves. They became permanent burdens on the communities they returned to, mouths that needed feeding by hands that no longer existed. Every person who saw them understood exactly what Assyrian resistance cost. Under King Sargon II, prisoners had their lips pierced with rings and were tethered by the piercings, led through streets like leashed animals. Ashurbanipal pierced captives' lips and transported them to Assyria, describing them explicitly as a spectacle for the people of my land. But the detail that separates this entry from everything else is what Ashurnasirpal did with the parts he removed. He didn't discard them. He organized them. A heap of young men's ears, a minaret, a tower, constructed from old men's severed heads. He built architecture out of human remains, structures designed to stand, designed to be seen. The dead can't remember what happened to them. The living can't forget. Mass deportation, death by erasure. The mutilated survivors lost their hands and faces. The deported lost something no blade could reach. The Assyrian Empire perfected mass deportation on a scale the ancient world had never seen. Entire populations, tens of thousands at a time, were forcibly relocated hundreds of miles from their homeland, separated from families, severed from communities, language groups, and everything familiar. But in the ancient Near East, deportation destroyed something far deeper than geography. In Mesopotamian religion, gods were tied to specific physical locations. A city's god lived in that city's temple, in that city's statue, on that city's land. Deportation didn't just displace a person from their home. It severed their connection to divine protection entirely. You weren't relocated, you were spiritually abandoned. The most documented case is the deportation of Israel. Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, and Sargon II collectively deported the population of the northern kingdom of Israel across multiple campaigns, an event recorded in both Assyrian royal inscriptions and the Hebrew Bible. An entire nation scattered. Then came the final stroke. The Assyrians practiced what scholars call god-napping. They physically seized the statues and idols of conquered people's gods and carried them back to Assyria. In the ancient world, a god statue was the god's presence on earth. By taking the statue, the Assyrians didn't just loot a temple, They kidnapped an entire city's divine protection. The emptied cities were resettled with strangers loyal to Assyria. Within one generation, the original inhabitants' children didn't speak the same language. Within two, they didn't remember where they came from. No blood, no fire, no scars. Just a people who used to exist and quietly stopped. Desecration of the dead, punishment beyond the grave. Deportation erased the living from their land. Ashurbanipal found a way to reach the dead. His campaign against the kingdom of Elam produced an inscription unlike anything else in the ancient world. His own words: "The sepulchres of their earlier and later kings I destroyed, I devastated, I exposed to the sun. Their bones I carried off to Assyria. I laid restlessness upon their shades. I deprived them of food offerings and libations of water." In Mesopotamian belief, the dead required ongoing offerings of food and water from the living to find peace in the underworld. These weren't symbolic gestures. Within that belief system, stopping the offerings condemned the dead, literally, not metaphorically, to eternal suffering in the realm beneath the earth. Ashurbanipal dug up the royal tombs of Elam's kings. He exposed their bones to sunlight, a deliberate act of spiritual violation. He physically removed the bones from their sacred resting ground and transported them to Assyria. Permanently. Then he stopped the offerings. No food, no water, no peace. Forever. But one line in his inscription stands entirely alone in the ancient record. "I laid restlessness upon their shades." Shades meant spirits, ghosts, the dead themselves. Ashurbanipal was claiming he had reached into the afterlife and inflicted suffering on people who were already dead. No other king in the ancient world, Babylonian, Egyptian, Persian, or otherwise, ever made this claim. This wasn't an act of rage, it was strategy. Destroying a nation's connection to its ancestors destroyed its spiritual foundation, its identity, and its afterlife. Ashurbanipal didn't just defeat Elam, he sentenced its dead to suffer forever and made sure the living knew there was no one left to save them. Every entry before this destroyed the body or the nation. This one destroyed the soul. The Fall of Nineveh, 612 BC. Every entry on this list killed a person, a people, or a spirit. This one killed the empire that did it all. For 300 years, the Assyrian Empire impaled, flayed, burned, mutilated, deported, and desecrated its way across the ancient world. It carved every act into stone. It mounted skins on temple walls. It built towers from severed heads. It reached into the afterlife and tormented the dead. In 612 BC, the world answered. A coalition of Babylonians and Medes, former subjects, former victims, surrounded Nineveh, the crown jewel of Assyrian civilization, the city whose palace walls displayed 2 centuries of calculated atrocity in carved relief. They besieged it, breached it, burned it to the ground. The destruction was so total that within 200 years, the Greek soldier Xenophon marched past the ruins and had no idea what they were. He didn't recognize the name. He didn't know the empire. The most feared civilization in the ancient world had been erased so completely that people forgot it had ever existed. Nineveh wasn't rediscovered until the 1840s, when British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard dug into a mound in northern Iraq and found the palace walls, still carved with images of impalement, flaying, and burning. The Assyrians' own record of atrocities, buried for 2,500 years, was what finally brought them back to human memory. One final detail. When the coalition forces broke through the walls, the last Assyrian king, Sin-shar-ishkun, reportedly set fire to his own palace and burned himself alive inside rather than face capture. The empire that burned 3,000 people alive at Kinabu ended with its own king choosing fire. 300 years of terror. And the punishment was being forgotten entirely.